G'day Grifters, it seems you found your way back to the Grift Code channel and another installment of the DORA Project. As the title of this video has led you to believe, this video is all about the creation of a custom boat Livewell. In this first part, we'll be going through the steps I've taken to create what's effectively an aluminium box and how to get it mounted into the boat. This Livewell will not only serve to be empty almost all of the time because I can't catch fish, but as a structural element of the casting deck that's to go in. If you're new here, this is DORA. In our last episode, we put a new casting deck up the front, whilst this episode sets us up to finish the full-length front casting deck. This episode takes us through cutting the material, welding it up, squaring it up, and bolting it into the boat and water testing it. So there's no time to lose. Off camera, I worked out some rough dimensions for the Livewell tank. I based these off the blue esky you can see in the background. This Livewell is going to come in at about 70 litres. My new metal cutting saw is nothing short of a dream. I am so pleased I don't have to use a jigsaw anymore, because the metal cutting blade makes ultra clean and straight cuts in mere seconds. This is one of my new favourite tools in the shop. I found a little WD-40 help things moving smoothly and without catching. With 5 separate sheets cut, we have the front and back face, a bottom face, and 2 sides. All the sheets were cut from 3mm sheet stock. I planned out my cut pattern too to maximise the most of my 2400 by 1200 sheet. A quick mock-up with some tape showed that everything looked hunky-dory. Now this little time-lapse shows my struggles as I try and tack this all together. Keep in mind, I'd only been teaching myself how to weld for a few weeks. I'm sure a bunch of you are thinking, geez Will, not everyone can do that, but bear with me. Here's a couple progress pics as I learnt to weld. Starting woefully, but by taking my time and watching YouTube videos, just like you, I've got to a remotely passable stage. Though I am by no means an expert, this is a seriously cool skill to try and get better with, albeit it's a little expensive to get into. I'm pretty certain I've got some experienced welders watching, so I hope they can chime in the comments, because Cunningham's law states the best way to get the right answer on the internet is not to ask a question, but to post the wrong answer. Anyway, I hope I'm not leading you guys down the garden path, but learning how to weld is totally achievable. Have a think about it because it's a lot of fun and you can start getting into more projects like these. With the sheets all tacked together, we had the formation of a box. You can see here that I pieced it together so the corners were a butt joint rather than a corner joint. I did intend to use a corner joint, but it ended up being a little too challenging for me. I tacked together long lengths of the seams with filler rod, whilst most of the sections were welded together without using any filler. So far everything is holding up, but I'll have to monitor it closely to make sure it doesn't crack. Now, I'm not sure how I made the miscalculation, but the Livewell ended up being too tall by 6.5mm. Maybe it was just a very convenient excuse to crack out the circular saw again. By running around the perimeter, I was able to control the cut that took off just the right amount. This was actually a frustratingly fiddly process, so take my word for it, measure twice and cut once. With most of the perimeter cut, the last little slivers were cut from the frame with a hacksaw. I'm still surprised with how effective this process was, and that the little frame that was cut stayed together so rigidly. Now that the Livewell was chopped a little shorter, I can show you why we needed to make it a little lower. With the positioning of the steel hinge and the thickness of the alley plate, the top surface of the deck would have sat too high by a fair portion. Now this way, with everything lower, the deck can now run perfectly flush with the seat. From this position, you can see the Livewell is spanning across 2 trusses, supported by the factory ribs. Unfortunately, these surfaces aren't parallel with the bench seat, which causes the Livewell to fall away. Now as I was trying to demonstrate this, I pushed my finger a little too heavily against the freshly cut edge and cut deep into my fingertip. I should have been wearing my gloves, as I know too well how sharp this is. By elevating the Livewell slightly with a wedge, I could calculate the length of the truss needed to level out the system. To chop out the old truss is pretty easy, but some care does need to be taken to make sure you don't cut too deep and into the rib of the boat. When I lifted the floor, I had chopped out the rear truss, and it ended up being the perfect length to replace this truss. Laying down the extrusion and placing the Livewell on top showed very quickly that we were in the right ballpark and ready to weld in the new old truss. Or at least, that's what I thought I was ready to do. A quick inspection of the argon gas tank showed that I might have made a mistake somewhere and had a slow leak in the system. After shedding a few moments of disappointment, I jumped in the car to grab a new tank of argon to get back into the welding. Not only was the truss to be welded, but the addition of a vertical support to minimise the bowing of the truss across the ribs. This is where I got a little lazy and didn't clean up the paint from the truss, but all worked out okay. Another test fit of the Livewell, and everything looked good to progress to the next step. In its current form, there is no hatch support and also no structural support stopping the walls from folding outwards. To counter this, I need to add a perimeter around the top edge. A length of alley angle, miter cut at the corners, provides a tidy surface with some easy welding opportunities for a noob like me. A quick disclaimer, I ended up adding a fourth perimeter to the front of the Livewell. I had originally thought that I wouldn't need it as the hatch was to be supported by the hinges. I'll go through that in a bit more detail in the next video where I go through the full deck build. After firing up the TIG again, I go in and make my tack welds. This was a little easier than before as everything was much more stable. With this sequence of welding, I tried my best to get better at feeding the filler to build up the welds. But again, it was pretty convenient to fall back into welding the edges without any additional filler. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts in the comments if you think this is okay. As a bit of a peace of mind, I sealed the inside edges using 291 Marine Sikaflex, which is some pretty gnarly stuff, and it is still holding up really well. After letting the Sikaflex dry, it was time for a water test. Truth be told, this was actually the second water test whilst the first was without Sikaflex sealant. There was a very small leak, but I figured I shouldn't push my luck with the welding and instead use a bit of Sika. Either way, it was very rewarding to see the tank full with no leaks made all by myself. After the test, the tank is on its way back into the boat to try work out a way of securing it to the deck. I opted for welding two small tabs to the rear corners of the tank to be secured to the floor truss. These were cut from the same angle extrusion as the top lips. Whilst I was really proud of these welds, that pride was quickly tainted by the realisation that I'd just melted the Sikaflex sealant inside the Livewell. Oh well, that's just a future video's problem. Now, it wouldn't be a DORA Project video if a rib nut wasn't being put into the boat. This may seem a little obvious, but pilot marking these holes is so important for good alignment as rib nuts can be a little temperamental when coming in at odd angles. Pilot drill, then drill to size and rib nut and you shouldn't have any problems. In reality, there shouldn't be much chance of the Livewell tank to move once the surrounding deck and frame is secured. But for the peace of mind, securing it directly to the truss made sense. As another assurance, to avoid any unnecessary metal-to-metal contact between the Livewell and the truss, I added a strip of EVA foam which will get compressed once everything is tightened up. And unfortunately, that's where I'm going to have to leave you today. Again, I'd like to ask a favour that if you've liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. In the future videos, I'll be finishing off the mid-deck build, as well as showcasing how I plumb and wire up the Livewell pumps. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope to see you in the next Grift video. See ya!